Serious, what's the creepiest true story that happened to you or someone you know? Serious replies only, you/grumpy dietitian, this happened to a friend of mine, it's a Sunday. She comes home to her apartment from running errands around 1 p.m. She was in med school at this time, so she pretty much parked herself at the kitchen table and studied for the next 5 to 6 hours. She's sitting there and looks up to see a dude casually stroll out of her bedroom. No other entrances, she's sitting by the front door, so he's been there the entire time she has been home. He pauses at the doorway to her kitchen, between her and the door. She basically froze. Then her phone rang and kind of startled both of them. She ran to get the phone, he ran out the door. She moved and got an enormous dog, he was in her apartment the whole time. This is one of my biggest fears. You/Ricardo_Tubbs, kinda similar story. I was with my girlfriend at the time chilling in the basement garage listening to music, having drinks. I go up to the kitchen looking for my phone but can't find it. I had a few drinks so I must have misplaced it somewhere, no biggie. Anyhow, I see my GF's phone was charging so I pick it up to check the time. I then go back down to the basement garage. Later on the night, she goes up to the kitchen upstairs looking for her phone but she can't find it. Anyhow, we both go upstairs, we both had a few drinks and end up going to bed. Next morning, I'm looking for my phone, she's looking for her phone but we can't find them, weird, since I had seen her phone the night before. Then I notice my watch is not where I left it. She looks outside to the backyard and sees her purse and my work computer lying on the grass, WTF. It then hit us that someone had actually entered the house while we were downstairs in the basement garage, and not only that, they were actually hiding when I came up to get my phone since I had checked hers and it was missing the morning after. Goes without saying that I changed all locks, put motion detection lights in the backyard and put a locked fence. One thing is to robbed, but another is to be robbed while you are in the house. You/Gerbil I just moved into a basement suite. Every time I went out I would lock the deadbolt but not the door handle, but when I came home a lot of the time the deadbolt would be unlocked and the door handle would be locked. At first I thought I was just confused about which one I had locked, so I started paying more attention. It kept happening and I realized someone must be going in when I went out. I assumed it was the landlady and was annoyed but didn't say anything at first. Then one day I came home and found the wrong lock locked again. I went in pissed off and opened the fridge to get something to eat. There was a book in the fridge that I had never seen before. I collected old books and this one was published in the early 1900s, which creeped me out completely because it was like it had been left for me. I finally called my landlady and asked if she was going into my apartment and told her what had happened. She freaked right out, said the last person who lived there was a really creepy guy with mental health and drug problems. She got all the locks changed that day and it never happened again. You/Muckduffin, when I was about 14 my parents left me alone overnight for the first time. I grew up in a small farming community, so my parents really had nothing to worry about. They left and I decided to take an awesome bubble bath and paint my nails like all girls everywhere, obviously. While I was in the bath, I heard our back door open. I thought I was hearing things, and besides, I had locked all the doors per my mom's orders. But then I heard the kitchen floor squeaky spot. I didn't know what to do, so I just went under the bubbles and left my head out. I saw two shoes through the crack between the door and the floor. I could hear a person breathing. They stood there for about 30 seconds and then walked away. I heard the door slam but I didn't move, I just stayed there until the water was freezing and cried. Then I got out, called my grandma, and checked the doors. The back door was unlocked and the lock hadn't been messed with or broken. Later that week we learned that a man was breaking into farmhouses. You/Shrinsky, back in the 70s my grandfather dropped my grandmother, mom, and her two sisters off to do some shopping on his way to work. Since he wasn't able to pick them up, they hitchhiked home. My mom at the time was only around 10 or 11, middle sister would have been about 7 or 8 and the youngest was about a year old. They get picked up by a guy in pickup truck, who has them all sit in the back row with one of them holding the baby. My grandmother was giving directions to their home from the highway, but the guy ignored her and went by their exit claiming he had to make a stop first. Didn't really say much else to them during the drive. My mom remembers my grandmother being very quiet and very nervous. Eventually they come up to a farm, driver tells them to wait in the car and goes inside the house. While he's gone they just sit there terrified, they're in the middle of nowhere and know they couldn't make it out on foot. A few minutes later the driver comes out with a second guy who looks into truck and sees my mom's youngest sister. He starts flipping out, screaming at the driver that he shouldn't have brought the baby back, they aren't going to do anything with her and some other things I can't remember, ends up telling him to get them away from the farm. Driver gets back into the truck, apologizes, and they get back on the highway and drive again in silence. My grandmother, normally a very smart woman, had him drive directly to their house, although I suspect her reasoning was she'd already given him the address before anything seemed off. They lived at that house for several years and luckily never saw either of them a second time. TLDRA baby saved my grandma and her kids from being our pet. U/Gookinator 5000, when I was about 9 or 10, my older brother and I had a few friends over to stay the night. My dad had to work the next day so we were all left at the house by ourselves for the day. We were excited to play PlayStation all day on our Saturday off. Well, my dad worked late that night, until probably 8 or 9. As soon as the sun went down we went into one of the rooms upstairs to play Uno. Fast forward 30 minutes and we start hearing footsteps slowing walking up the wooden stairs. My dad wasn't going to be home for another 2 hours so we didn't know who it was. There were 4 of us, me, my brother, my friend, and his friend. We would take turns walking out of the room to see what it was, but before we could look down the dark stairs we would hear what sounded like someone running down the stairs as fast as they could so they couldn't be seen. This continued for probably 2 hours, ending with all of us huddled in the room upstairs with the door wedged shut with a chair until my dad got home. None of us were really believers in anything paranormal, but a child's imagination is a crazy thing. Now 15 years later, I still don't know what to make of it, but every one of us heard those footsteps walking up those dark stairs. I bring it up to my friend who I'm still friends with and he remembers it just as vividly as I do. It kind of creeps me out just thinking about it. U/motherfucking breadcrumbs, when my wife was in college, she took a philosophy class or something. On the first day everyone announced who they were etc. Turns out she was sitting next to a police officer who was taking the class for continuing education or a promotion, can't remember, but he was actively a police officer. This was really great for her because she's small and it was a night-time class. They became friends-ish, as much as 2 people sitting next to each other for a few classes are. He agreed to walk her to her car after class since the school wasn't in the best area and it made her feel safe. Around mid-terms he stopped showing up. She's kind of confused, but figured life happens and something else probably came up. A few weeks later we're at her parents' house and her mom asks if we had heard about the police officer that had been arrested. We hadn't, so she begins to fill us in on this police officer that had been pulling women over and are pinging them in their cars. We live in a small town, but it gets super rural super fast if you leave, so nobody is passing these scenes as they're happening. Anyway. Turns out that the officer raping women was the same guy that was walking her to her car after class every week, and the reason he wasn't in class was because he had been arrested. U/Criniere, when I was around 14 years old, I really liked to go for runs with my Shepherd X Lab. I lived in a fairly quiet, clean suburban neighborhood that was situated beside a broad expanse of pasture used by about 10 horses, I would say it was roughly 40 acres. Anyway, a bike path ran between the pasture and my neighborhood and I generally ran down the path. One night I decided to go with my pup around 10 p.m. May not seem like the smartest decision, but I had spent many nights with my group of friends biking/rollerblading around the neighborhood, so I thought nothing of the late hour. I was running down the bike path with my dog, who is a big pup yet the friendliest guy you'll meet. As we ran I noticed a dark lump a little ways ahead, and because it was nearly pitch black I could barely see it. I dismissed it as a garbage bag. As we drew closer, My dog perked up his ears and his hackles went up and he started to growl, which he rarely ever does. He loves basically everything. I stopped running and stared as the garbage bag started to move. 14-year-old me still didn't really know what the heck I was looking at, and it wasn't until the supposed garbage stood up that I realized it was a man, who then started to run towards us. My dog then turned around and, I kid you not, started to run and yanked me along behind him. We reached a street, he darted down it, then pulled me into a dark alley. Onto another street, then another alley, then another street, until we somehow lost the guy. My dog saved my life, I'm pretty sure. The guy may not have been an axe murderer, but it turns out some creepy ex-felon was arrested in our neighborhood about 2 days later. I love my dog. You/sucked too. Several years ago I lived in a semi-underground basement apartment. Basically the house was just enough underground that the windows were just a couple of inches off the ground on the outside. So one night I'm washing dishes in the kitchen which had a window to my left which was open. I'm almost finished when a voice whispers, "Looking good there with the dishes." There was someone crouched down by the window on the outside who had been watching me for who knows how long. Unfortunately for Creep Boy I was washing the knives, and as I turned he evidently got scared by the gigantic chef's knife I was brandishing in his general direction and he ran off. I hated that apartment. Eventually I tacked thick fabric over most of the windows to avoid having to watch people pee drunkenly on them.